Hello everyone, this is Michael from United Wolves Productions, and welcome to yet another episode of Behind the Lens. In this episode of Behind the Lens, we shall be focusing on the first episode of Roommates. As of last week, we officially have a Patreon account, so please consider donating so we can carry on entertaining you with all things happening at United Wolves Productions. We'll begin the exploration of episode 1 with the writing. And who better to talk about the writing than the person who's responsible for creating it all? Take it away, Dylan.
Hello there! I'm the android man behind the scenes, writing the scripts for these yarns. Firstly, I must congratulate everyone for being so successful in the festival circuit, winning awards for Best Director, Best Actor, Best Actor, Best Actress, Best Cinematographer, Best Editor, and multiple Best Picture wins to name a few. With the amount of work they are putting in during every shoot day, they absolutely deserve the accolades. The fact that many festivals do not have a category for screenwriting doesn't make me salty at all. I've totally moved on. I'm definitely not annoyed. Episode 1. We start off by seeing each of the characters doing their thing. Harry is drawing while listening to music, Jeremy is preparing food, and Angelina is... Funny enough, if we look at the script, originally she was going to be introduced by cleaning the living room. But when we were talking on set, based on how she is throughout the show, we decided that this would be a better opening for her. And because of that change, a couple of the lines needed to be altered as well. So, instead of, "How did cleaning go? Bigger mess than I expected. Always is with you," we rewrote it on the day to...
How's the sun?
Oh, still warm.
For sure.
The following page is a gradual escalation, where it starts off simple and by the time we cut away, they are insulting each other.
Like this.
There are a couple of functions here. One, as said earlier, is that it is an escalation of the situation. Two, it highlights the type of relationship they have, which is they can get along, but things break down quickly between them and they end up arguing over anything, highlighting how confrontative they are and their unwillingness to back down. 3. It reveals aspects of themselves. Jeremy is someone willing to take the time to get things done his way, while she is willing to settle down for the easier path if it means getting the job done anyway. 4. Sets up their relationship status. And finally, the fact Jeremy being single is brought up twice by her is to reinforce that it is something she cares about, and the fact she deflects it is her not wanting to address it head on, as it is with every flaw Jeremy throws at her. Whether these things are going to be addressed or not is a mystery you will have to keep watching to find out. Now, why the conflict is related around something so mundane is because if you live with multiple people and there is only one restroom, waiting for it and deciding who goes first can be annoying, but boosting the absurdity in such a situation seemed like something interesting to write. From Harry's reaction, it says right away that this is something that happens regularly and is quite used to it now to the point he leaves the two to their own devices. Their reaction when he enters the restroom is meant to communicate that they know he takes his sweet time in there, and rather than taking the boring way out and having the two wait for him, based on how over the top they are willing to behave already, it only made sense to push things further where they are willing to do their business in a bucket rather than wait for Harry to finish, which is meant to highlight just how impatient the two of them are, something they have in common. Now, because Harry was upstairs the entire time, he has no idea why they were fighting in the first place, and him going so far as to ask them if they want to use it first shows he is thinking of others, and is in fact quite aware of how long he takes. Meanwhile, Jeremy and Angelina's interaction outside further highlights their personalities, where she is quite indulgent, doing what she wants and justifying herself afterwards, while Jeremy is the opposite, establishing she is also quite promiscuous. The episode ends with Harry closing the door. That's all I've got. Bye!
Thank you, Dylan. If you care to follow more of his writing advice and analysis, please check his channel BobLobV2 and consider subscribing to him as well. On our side of writing, I can only say, as I mentioned last time, writing usually furthers either characters, plot, or the rules of the universe. Now, in this particular matter, because we wanted to introduce the characters and how they operate in the world, it does primarily focus only on character development. You could argue there's a little bit of world building because you get to see that big wish for arguments about little things that normal people wouldn't think twice. So in this instance, it does also speak about the rules of the world of roommates. We also knew that because of that, we wanted some very specific shots that we knew from the very beginning and included them in the storyboard. We knew that every character should be introduced in some sort of moving shot, showcasing what that character does in their spare time. So in Jeremy's case, that would have been the spices, because he is the cook of the house. In Harry's case would be the sketching and the headphones, because those tend to be his character traits. And in Angelina, that is enjoying the sun without doing much more whilst looking at her phone, because of her very superficial nature. The last thing that we definitely knew we wanted was the reveal of what Harry sees as the aftermath of the argument. Now, of course, because we've never been to the location prior to the shoot, we weren't very sure how we wanted to end it, and we choreographed it, for lack of a better term, on the day. Once we figure out what the scene is trying to do, then we can focus on the objectives of characters and what the feel of the scene should be in terms of shooting for the edit. Now, in the first episode, we know very well that as with most other episodes, Angelina and Jeremy, that's my character and Zori's character, tend to have completely opposing objectives. In this particular manner, they're both striving to be the first one to the bathroom. Howbeit, incredibly difficult for both of them to decide that, and that escalates to a much larger conflict. In Harry's instance, it is more important to not be a part of that argument, yet still be the one to end the argument by completing the objective none of the other characters could. That obviously meant that in terms of planning, we knew that we wanted a more relaxed beginning, showcasing each and every one of the characters, and then as the argument starts to build, we need a tighter edit with quicker cuts because it's a small conflict, ending up on a relaxed state of realization as to what actually happened. Now that we've briefly mentioned the pre-production side of things, let's get into actually breaking down every shot of the first episode of Roommates. Who's first? We begin with what is known in comedy series as a sting, and that's over an establishing shot of the location in which we shot the series. In our case, an Airbnb. Then we move on to the first moving shot of the main character of Roommates. Now, you notice throughout the episodes that Dan's character, Harry, doesn't speak a lot, but he is still the main protagonist of this, and as the story progresses, you'll notice why. I knew I wanted to begin the introduction with Harry being the first character to be introduced. Now, if you look at this shot, you notice there is, it's quite light, it's quite bright. On the nightstand there's a little practical light. Naturally, as we've discussed before, that doesn't light almost a single thing. In fact, over here, to the left, is the big Godox light that lights the entire room. I also knew that, as with the majority of the projects we film here, I always like to begin with a moving rather than a static shot. I find it that it brings people easier to the world of the piece. And in our case, 3 characters, introduction of 3 characters, introduction to 3 moving shots, showing them in their natural habitat, so to speak. And as the moving shot reveals more of Harry and Harry's room, you notice it does a sort of a parallax movement, thus showing both Harry doing what he likes most, but also showcasing a little bit the space that Harry lives in. We next move to the introduction of Jeremy. Now, because there was quite a lot of natural light, and we wanted to showcase it is day, we decided not to cover the window, which obviously meant that everything past the window is slightly overexposed. There's not much we could have done there without a big industry projector that could act as the sun. But we do open on the spices. As I mentioned before, it is one of Jeremy's character traits to cook. So Jeremy gathers spices. Now, as the camera reveals more of the room, you notice that the 3 hanging lights are lighting the space, though that's not where the biggest light comes from. The Go Dog sits comfortably in the opposite corner, next to the stairs, and on a C-stand up there, there is a little LED panel that acts as an additional backlight. The final thing about Jeremy's introduction is we wanted to not only, obviously we start on the spices, but we wanted to then reveal the entire segment of the kitchen where Jeremy would reside normally. If a scene is shot in the kitchen, usually Jeremy would be in that part of it. Now that we've introduced Jeremy, it is time to introduce the last addition to the trio, and that is Zori's character, Angelina. Now, we didn't use any of our lights for the outside shots of Angelina because, unfortunately, we have no lights that are a match for the sun. Although cloudy on this first shot, it would still be way more powerful than the strongest projector that we have. With Angelina's character, we wanted to showcase the one thing she cares about the most: herself, her appearance, and the fact that although she is outside enjoying the sun, she still can't take her eyes off the phone. The eating of the banana was a little symbol hinting at her promiscuity, which, not shown particularly in this episode, develops itself into a character trait later down the line in the series. Now, she doesn't eat the banana in any promiscuous way, but the sheer fact that that's her choice of food aids the characterization. Once we've introduced Angelina, we're back in the kitchen with Jeremy cutting bell peppers. Now, of course, we shot all of Jeremy's shots in the kitchen prior to this, and there were a few more shots that we didn't end up utilizing, but that's because we always film more coverage than we might need in the edit. Cutting back to Angelina, you notice that the sun is now out. Now, this is one of the biggest things to think about whilst shooting on the outside, that you are obedient to the will of the sun and the clouds. Now, although the introduction shot and this shot were filmed literally seconds apart, we had no power over the sun coming out, and no time for us to hope for the sun to come back behind a cloud to continue shooting that. There was another shot of Angelina here, but we couldn't use it because, as it was a much closer shot, the reflection of the boom pole was able to be seen, rendering the shot simply unusable. You notice that all of the introduction shots are filmed in a medium close-up, and the lens that we used was the 2470, currently sitting on a 50mm, which is the best amount of millimeters for the human face. As Angelina finishes up her banana with no regard to where she throws the peel, she goes inside. Later we find out to go to the toilet. Now, the reason why we have that shot of Jeremy looking outside of the window and realizing Angelina's coming and dashing towards the toilet himself was to show that, although being the more logical in the trio, he is still not above having a petty argument just so he can prove he is right. Something I do not share with the character in the slightest. Next we move to the corridor section of this episode, where we mostly utilize over-the-shoulder shots. Now, in these particular shots, they're good to both show two people in the conversation to make it feel more realistic, but also because each other's heads are in each other's frames, respectively, it feels like we're taking more of the space, and it's easier to showcase conflict in this way. Angelina comes in on a medium close-up, and then the moment Jeremy steps into the frame, it becomes an over-the-shoulder that stays on this kind of framing until the end of the argument. We originally had planned here to go into extreme close-ups as well, but as the space was too tight and as the shots were already kind of close, we thought it unneeded. In terms of lighting, something that you'll notice is my character has a backlight, which is sitting in the archway next to him. And there is no key light for my character because we use the natural light coming through the window, which is quite powerful in its own. Now that then turns into a small problem when it comes to Angelina, Because the big Godox light couldn't fit in the corridor, we could only use the little RGB softbox. And no matter how powerful that softbox was, it was always overpowered. It would have been always overpowered by the natural light coming from the door. So Angelina would have looked darker anyway. But in this case, unfortunately, the two lighting states don't quite match. But unfortunately, there was nothing else we could have done. The only other shot to mention here were the two hands on the door handle, showcasing the little struggle. Now, if anything, I would have wished that to be slightly more aggressive, but at the time we weren't exactly aware of how everything's going to fit together. As the argument escalates, we then cut to Harry's reaction to, of course, what we perceive as the fight sounds, which of course were recorded as a foley and then muffled in post-production to resemble the sound of a fight. This shot was also filmed with all the other shots of Harry in the beginning, but it is the final reaction shot in this room. Then, as Harry comes down the stairs with a towel around to go to the bathroom himself, I wanted that shot to be moving as well. I wanted to track Harry down the stairs, and as Harry notices the aftermath of the argument, then the camera moves to the other two characters, revealing the position they're in. This particular shot was lit primarily by the big Godox in this corner of the kitchen this time. The three lights that are already on top of the kitchen counter, and a small backlight at the end where Jeremy used to be before. And when the two characters devise their bathroom alternative, we cut to the final shot, the final frame of this episode. It is only shot with a front light of the small softbox, the RGB LED panel, and the backlight being the natural light. Now, in the original plan, in the original script, we were only supposed to hold on Harry and hear the muffled sounds of the argument outside. However, unexpectedly, because the door to the outside was glass, we thought it would be best to hold on to this shot and have all the three characters in a three-shot of a sorts, ending the episode. And then, after which, Harry slams the door and the episode ends. Now, the next thing I should just briefly mention is the editing of every episode. We tend to stick to the storyboard idea when editing an episode with only little changes due to what was possible on the shoot day. Now, with the opening shots, we knew that we wanted to stay a little longer on them, thusly showing the space that the characters occupy, the characters in full, and the activities that they were doing. But as we move to the argument stage, the cuts begin to be slightly quicker, showcasing a conflict. We did, also for the very beginning of the episode where we introduced the characters, there were quite a few more shots recorded, but we thought it's going to be too long of an opening to include all of them. And this way we tightened the edit a little bit more. Another thing to mention, which isn't as prevalent in this episode as in some of the other episodes, is matching the shots. Because there's technically only one conversation between two characters, we match an over-the-shoulder with an over-the-shoulder. But as we progress to further episodes, you'll see that there's quite a lot of variety of shots, and we have to make sure that we move in a particular frame and then change the particular frame with the unit of the scene. Other than the boom pole being visible in the glasses of Angelina, there weren't many problematic shots of this first episode, which gave us quite a false hope for the remaining of it. The last thing I should mention about the post-production process was that all of the additional sounds, like the fighting, like the big shouts and screams during the fight, like the final conversation, all of that was recorded additionally and then muffled in post-production. In terms of the actual argument that happens outside because of the bucket, We recorded that both on the outside and on the inside, and then chose which felt more clear to be muffled in post-production. Now, in this final part of this episode of Behind the Lens, we'll look at the finished product as it is, without breaking every shot down, and I'll tell you that as an objective director, what I could or would do next time to improve upon the quality. Now, on this first shot of the sting, the establishing shot, I would have liked to put the title of the episode, which is something that we actually fixed in every subsequent episode. Then we move to the introduction of Harry, listening to his music. Now, there is something to be said about this intro. On second viewing, it is quite quiet and slightly longer. Now, I think it would have been a good fix to put all the three characters listening to their own kinds of music. This would have been considered part of their characterization, and also would have helped the opening go a little smoother. So as Harry's listening to metal or hard rock, Jeremy would be listening to something classical or something more relaxing, and Angelina would be listening to something pop or hip-hop. Another thing to mention here, obviously, is if we had the means, I would have either diffused the sunlight a little bit so that Angelina's introduction shot and this shot match. But as I mentioned before, we didn't have the means to control the sun. Yeah, music would definitely have helped here.
Cooking going well?
Yes.
What are we having?
As they go into the corridor, the only thing I would wish to be able to do is either completely black out the natural light coming from the outside and replace that with a bigger projector, or have a bigger projector on Angelina's face, because the lighting on my face and Zori's face don't quite match, and that is a problem we couldn't fix at the time. Also, the insert shot of the hands on the door handle could have been a little bit more aggressive, but we weren't aware of how the framing is going to match with the rest of the argument, so that's on me.
How's the sun?
Oh, you know, still warm.
For sure. I'm going first.
In terms of acting here, I would actually scold myself for this, because we were still experimenting with the style of comedy. I am a little, or slightly more than a little, overacting in my face, which would have been good for theatre, but not so much for cinema. I think I relax as the production goes onwards. It's not bad, it's just a little bit too much. I think the Foley sounds here were great, and Dan's reaction is fantastic.
Did you just?
Yep.
I'm actually quite happy with what the fight turned out to be as well.
Oh, if you don't.
There's no massive fix here. There was a big discussion actually in editing at which point do we cut away from the fight and at which point do we go outside. I think we found a good enough balance. With the only problem that I am noticing now is that because we shot the final shot prior to the fight on the floor, the cravat that Jeremy wears and some of the stuff that are wrong with Angelina's hair or earrings are not seen as we're going out because we weren't aware that we have to do them prior to this. So this is more on continuity problem. And then finally, although this isn't a massive problem, you can see both me and Zori in the bathroom window under Harry's arm. And I think it works because they are in the backyard around the bucket, but then you could see our silhouettes at the end there as well. That's something very, very small, sort of blink and you'll miss it. But other than that, I think we did a pretty good job with the first episode. And that would conclude this episode of Behind the Lens. Join us next time when we break down the second episode of Roommates, Your Turn. And in the meantime, like, share, subscribe, and hit that notification bell to stay up to date with everything United Wolves Productions. Another gentle reminder of our new Patreon page, the link for which is in the description below. All of your support means a lot to us so we can keep entertaining you with all the content we have planned for months in the future. Thank you for watching this. I've been Michael Wolf at United Wolves Productions, and I'll see you next time on Behind the Lens.